everyone, it's Annabelle and this is my Phalaenopsis Joy Fairytale. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be repotting her and also putting her onto a DIY pole support, which will have a self-watering element but also help to stabilise her. So you can see she has these gorgeous, stunning peloric flowers and a wonderful citrusy fragrance. I have shown her quite a lot before. She's kind of always in bloom, so she gets a bit missed out sometimes, but this is her time of year where she just puts on such a great display. She was going to be in my What's in Bloom video, but I actually quite urgently need to repot her, as you can see. She's just leaning all over the place. She's got a great root system. She's been in this pot, I don't know how long, probably 2-3 years. I don't think I've ever repotted her actually, so probably nearer to 3 years, honestly. She's doing really well. There's no other reason to repot her other than I'd need to stabilise her kind of urgently before she turns into a leaning mess. She's got a great root system and the root system hasn't completely filled the pot yet. I planted her in a pot that was way oversized for her at the time, and she's grown into it. She's done very well, but yeah, as you can see, I attempted to stake her a while ago, over half of her length ago actually, and yeah, that's not really working anymore. It's not supporting her. She needs a bit of a change in her life, and I thought, why not a DIY pole inspired by moss poles that aroid people tend to use. I just figured that that would actually be quite a good way to support her as she grows more roots from down along her stem, which as she gets taller, the nodes available will be higher and higher, so she'll be reaching down further and further to the pot. Not necessarily a bad thing. The other option, I guess, if she didn't have many roots in the pot, would be to cut her in half. I'm not doing that. I love this orchid. I'm not going to cut her in half unnecessarily. She's got loads of roots in the pot. This isn't an issue with new roots getting down. It's more of an issue of supporting her while also potentially giving those new roots something to grab onto. So here I've got a PVC pole. PVC piping, really useful DIY tool to anyone who does a lot of DIY, that sort of thing. I definitely recommend having some of this just lying around because I've made so many kind of supports and mounts and that sort of thing from it for orchids, as well as pot ladders, that sort of thing. So I've drilled holes all the way along the length of this, around both sides, and that's going to act as kind of root access, and I'm going to stuff it with Synthic. The good thing about this is because it's going to be plastic on the outside, the moisture from the Synthic isn't going to seep through and lean against the stem, which is something that I'd be very wary of with Phalaenopsis. I do have another Vanda, a Papilanthe pedunculata, which is on a similar kind of setup and does very well, but that has a lot of Synthic and Hygralon wrapped around the outside because it doesn't matter that it's wet sitting against the stem because it's kind of a terrate leaf. Doesn't really have anywhere for water to sit, whereas with phals, stem rot is definitely a thing. So I'm going to start off by just untying this plant support that I've got in, which just isn't adequate for it at the moment. It's not tall enough. It's just a flower spike support that I put in when the orchid was still quite a lot smaller, which held it up. But as the orchid's got bigger, it's not holding it up anymore, and the weight of the orchid is just pulling the stake over. So we're just going to take the orchid out of the pot, and because this is an acrylic pot, it's not flexible at all, so I'm just going to tip off as much lekker as I can from within the pot, which will free up a little bit of room for me to be able to wiggle around the orchid and kind of remove the orchid from the pot. It's actually coming out quite easily. So we're out. Great root system, and luckily I've actually repotted it before it became incredibly pot bound, but you can see that the roots are very good. It stayed pretty moist in this pot, and as the roots have become more extensive, what we've actually found is they are acting as wicks, so the top of the pot was staying pretty moist. So I'm actually going to put it into a self-watering pot, which will have a little bit more airiness, stay a little bit drier at the top. And I know I always struggle with dry top layers, but with this orchid I've actually struggled with a very moist top layer, which in my new environment is actually causing a little bit of mold to grow on the top, so I want to keep the top layer a little bit drier for this one. So I'm just going to position it into the 17cm pot first. The complimentary white outer mask that fits this pot was actually given to me by Nina, and I ordered these pots from Luck Orchidine, I think, and I quite like them because they also have air cones at the bottom, which isn't strictly necessary with a self-watering setup, but it will increase the aeration kind of ratio in the pot if the base of the pot isn't always sat in water, if there's a little bit of ventilation and more room for gas exchange within the self-watering setup. It's just something that I'm trying to increase aeration wherever possible within my pots, while still managing the dry top layer, not having roots desiccate, and giving enough moisture in the pot. So we can see the orchid is leaning one way, where it got too big for my shelves and I took it off the shelves and it started leaning towards the light. So I'm going to position that direction that it's leaning in up against the support, and we've got new root tips emerging from this direction as well. So I am hoping that these new root tips will grab onto the support, but we'll see what happens. The smooth plastic won't desiccate the roots in any way, and if the roots do grab onto it, they may find a little hole that they can get into and travel down inside. If that happens, I'll never be able to remove it, but it's inorganic, so I wouldn't necessarily need to. The Synthic inner I can keep drier in winter, and in summer I can water from above. A little bit of water will splash out through the holes into the stem, depending on how vigorously I water through the hole. But I've done this with my Papilanthe. It works really well, and it's just keeping it a bit drier in winter and not watering it, because obviously you don't want any water to splash onto the stem during winter. But in summer my environment is very dry, and I can actually foliar feed and spray things and they dry pretty instantly. So any water that splashed out wouldn't be a problem. Just going to grab a cable tie and use that to actually attach the orchid. I'm going to do this by threading the cable tie between leaf joins either side of the stem, and then securing it at the back around the pole, and not securing this too tightly. I don't want to damage any leaves. I don't want to push the crown of the orchid up against this. So I'm just going to attach it quite loosely, but firmly enough that it's going to give plenty of support, and we've put it quite deep down into the pot, so it's really going to stabilise very well in with the lekker once we fill around with the lekker mix that I'm going to be using. So I'm just going to snip off the end of this cable tie so that it's not showing. I've chosen to use a whitish transparent one, so it's not massively obvious. It does show at the front of the plant because I chose to overlap quite a large portion of the stem. I definitely could have done this more discreetly, but I wanted to provide quite a large area so it wasn't cutting into like a tight area of stem, and it was providing plenty of support, like a little belt for this orchid around its waist, and I'm pretty happy with that. Obviously it's not the most elegant looking contraption on the world, but I feel like this is going to serve a purpose, and it's white, so it's going to tone in with the white outer mask that I've got and not look too clunky, hopefully. So now that I've secured the orchid, I'm just going to fill around with a mixture of lekker and lava rock that I'm choosing to use for this orchid in the self-watering system. It's already got Synthic wicks in the pot. The lava in this pot will increase the amount of moisture held compared to if I was using lekker alone, but since it's a self-watering system instead of semi-hydro, there's going to be better aeration anyway, and probably a drier top layer, so I think that that will balance quite nicely with the moisture to air ratio in this pot. Just going to speed through me filling around the orchid. Just going to turn the orchid around and fill around the other side. So I filled both sides around with plenty of medium. And as you can see, the fact that we've got a large root mass in the pot means that I'm kind of at a level where I'm stuck and I can't put more medium in. So I'm just going to squeeze the orchid pot gently to settle the lekker and lava mix down into the root ball. The fragrance from this orchid is just like filling the whole area that I'm working in. It's really, really amazing. It's really citrusy, and I actually find this almost a little bit stronger than the Bellina, but I guess that's probably because it has larger flowers and more flowers. Anyway, I'd really recommend this orchid. Just a really pretty, one of my favourites, Phalaenopsis types actually. I say that about them all, but they're all our favourites at different points in time, right? I know that the Phalaenopsis Joy Fairytale is quite hard to get in some regions. In the UK and Europe, it's quite readily available, so if you are interested in getting it, you definitely can. Just do a Google search. There's a few nurseries that stock it quite regularly, and I think you can find it on eBay quite often. This particular one was from Spiceotic Plants some years ago. I just love it because the flowers are kind of alien-esque and they look like they should be from another planet, honestly. I love that. Some peloric flowers aren't my favourite, but this is my type of peloria, if you know what I mean. So after lots of squeezing and settling the medium into the root ball, we are now ready for another layer of medium. I've settled it enough that most of the large air gaps are filled. If there are lots of big air gaps in the pot, then the wicking efficiency will be less. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill around. Right, we are all done. All of the medium is settled into the large air gaps in the root ball, and I'm happy with that, and I'm happy with the level. Next we're going to add in our pebble top layer. So I'm using some washed river gravel type pebbles. These are non-porous, non-wicking, and they won't suck moisture from the roots, they won't desiccate roots, and they'll keep that top layer of lekker underneath them nice and moist because it can't transfer its moisture to them. Okay, that's all done. I'm going to squeeze to settle the river pebbles very slightly in the pot and just add a couple of more to top up any gaps that appear. And then we are done and ready to stuff our pole with some Synthic. So this is the orchid now in the pot. I'm very happy with the positioning, and I think it looks miles better than how wonky and skewed and drunk looking she looked before. What do you guys think, before or after? So I've got my Synthic right here that I'm going to stuff down the pole using a plastic long stake that I've got just to push the Synthic down in layers. And I was debating using lava rock or lekker for this, which is what I've used previously as a filling, but I do think that the Synthic will be easier to moisten by using my pump sprayer down the open end of the pole, and also be very good in the when it's dry and I'm keeping it drier in winter. If any roots do go down during that time, it's not going to desiccate or anything, whereas a dry kind of porous wicking material like lekker or lava rock might. Dry Synthic just doesn't affect roots. It's really quite great stuff, and I'm going to be using it more I think for seedlings from now on, because in my climate porous materials don't stand up well to wet dry cycles, which is sometimes needed for some orchids in some situations like this. So I'm just going to fill the pole up with Synthic. Final result, Phalaenopsis on a self-watering pole type thing. I think she looks great, and I think she looks much better upright than she did leaning over. So I think this support is going to stand up much better to her growth habit than just the stake alone. I've got plenty of length in there for as she grows up. Hopefully we'll get some roots attaching and going down. It would be really great to see if some roots wanted to go inside. But if they don't want to go inside to play, then I'm also totally happy with that and just using this as a support. We'll see how it goes. Obviously, if they don't want to go inside the pole, then I probably don't need to use the Synthic element and could just have had it as a support, but I just really am hoping that some of the roots will go in. We'll see what happens, and I will update on this, of course. If you're interested to see more videos about Synthic, I've been using it quite extensively over the last year or so with orchids like Miltoniopsis, Nellie Eilers, adding it into Oncidium mixes to increase the moisture in the pot. I've also done some medium trials with it where I kind of measured how much water it held on to. It's fairly pH neutral, although obviously roots themselves can act to influence pH in the pot and acidify the medium irrespective of medium decomposing. So that's something to bear in mind, but it's pH neutral, can be washed. You can put this in the sink with a load of washing up liquid and get all the algae and dirt off and reuse it. So it's great in that respect, and it acts very similarly to sphagnum moss. If anything, it does hold on to more moisture, but it also does dry quite quickly when you provide lots of ventilation, so that's not too much of an issue. I think Joy here will appreciate this. She loves a lot of moisture in her pot. It's also definitely an idea that could be modified to actually a mount situation if you place the orchid on the outside of a larger PVC pipe and put lots of holes so roots could get into, but you'd need a lot of care and hydration before the mounted orchid actually attached and got roots in, so that's what puts me off that kind of self-watering mount element, but in theory that could also work. Thank you so much for watching my video today, and if you did enjoy this video or want to see more from me, then don't forget to give this video a like or subscribe to my channel for more regular orchid updates and random DIYs, and I'll see you guys all later. Have a great day, happy growing until next time, bye!